Okay, everyone, let's talk about Zack Snyder's Justice League, the fabled, the mythical Snyder Cut, the original version of what Justice League was supposed to be. Now, I have reviewed this movie before on the channel. Looking back on it, don't really care for that review. Don't really think I got my thoughts clearly across, mainly because I'd only seen it for a second time, and I was still teetering on what grade I really wanted to give it. So this is going to be my definitive review after a third watching of the film. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk about it in contained parts. I'm going to review the first half and then the second half, and then hopefully I'll have a more clear perspective on how I truly feel about Zack Snyder's Justice League. So let me talk about part one, all self-contained, all by itself. Right off the bat, I'll give this movie this. It's the same tone as Man of Steel and BVS. It's the same tone as those two movies. It doesn't feel disconnected from those two movies, especially since the first opening minutes pretty much starts off with Superman being killed by Doomsday and him letting out this yelping scream that awakens the mother boxes that calls to Steppenwolf. So instantly, this movie's connective tissue to BVS is very prevalent. And like I said, the tone is very consistent with what came before it. It doesn't feel overly jokey. It doesn't feel, the color palette is not brightened for no reason. It's that same washed out color palette that was in Man of Steel and BVS that I am not an ultimate fan of, but at least it's consistent, and at least it feels like you're watching the third half, the third chapter of a story. So I'll give it that. In terms of the performances, I think the acting in the Schneider cut is actually really better when you compare the two. The acting from most of the principal cast is actually very, very solid, on point. Ben Affleck in this version is the same as he is in the BVS, in which he plays Bruce in a less jokey way and more of that brooding way. But his character arc is him starting to have more faith in the world and not being so vicious. So I like how that's handled. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman. Listen, I'll never be a fan of Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I don't think she's that great of an actress, but she's not that bad in this movie. She's fine. Stain Miller, his jokes aren't as cringe in this version as they are in the 2017 movie. He's actually okay in this version as the Flash. I mean, his whole scene is actually completely different. You know, when we first see Miller's Flash in the Schneider cut, he's actually saving Iris West from being killed in an auto accident. And, I like the scene. I'm not going to lie. I like the scene. I like how Zack Snyder shoots the Flash in his super speed mode, in which the slow motion is actually utilized to its fullest potential. And trust me, I'll get to my gripes with the slow motion in this movie, because Jesus Christ. But yeah, when the slow motion is utilized to showcase Flash's speed, I really like it. And like I said, I did not mind Ezra Miller in this movie. I actually prefer Ezra Miller's version of the Flash in Schneider cut than I did in the 2017 movie. It's light years better. Aquaman, Momoa, he's basically handled relatively the same way he is in this movie as he was in 2017. Only the jokes are very downplayed, and it's taken much more seriously. And he has scenes with Willem Dafoe's Vulko, and he has a slightly different scene with Mera, who is played by Amber Turd, who is doing a really bad British accent. But thank God she's not in the movie long. And then they do a little fight scene. So yeah, Momoa's Aquaman in this movie is handled relatively the same, with some differences here and there. Cyborg. I gotta say this, the first half of Justice League is dedicated mostly to Cyborg and his origin, and for the most part, I give Zack Snyder credit. He did it fairly well. You get his strained relationship with his father. You get the loving relationship with his mother. You see his accident. You see that he was a star quarterback football player for Gotham City College. You see his father struggling with the idea of potentially losing his son and making the ultimate decision to pretty much use the mother box to keep him alive. You see Victor's struggle with this new life that's been forced onto him. And you see, like I said, the strained relationship with his father is also played out, and it's actually done fairly well. And Joe Morton, who I thought was really underutilized in 2017, is actually utilized very well in this version. I like Joe Morton's performance as Silas Stone. He and Ray Fisher have really good on-screen chemistry with one another, and Joe Morton really plays the more concerned father side of Silas Stone, in which he talks to him like he's a scientist at first, but he's also coming at it from a fatherly perspective at the same time. I like it, and I like how throughout the course of part one, you know, fences slowly start to mend between Silas and Victor, which I like, because I'm not an overly big Cyborg fan. I don't know a lot about his comic book origins except for the fact that, he's a human cyborg and that he has daddy issues. But I think it's mostly taken from the New 52 origin, if I'm not mistaken. I really don't know, because like I said, I'm not a big Cyborg fan, in which he does have a fractured relationship with his dad, but it improves greatly as it goes on, and that's what you have in this movie. I do not care for the extra scenes with Cyborg in which he showcases his powers by fixing a woman's account, him going into and him having like these virtual reality type of things. Dude, I think you could have trimmed all that out of the movie. All you really needed was Cyborg's origins and how he became what he was. You didn't need that extra 5 minutes of him doing random stuff that do absolutely nothing for the plot. I mean, yeah, it showcases his powers, but you can do that with him but you can do that in an action sequence and not dedicating 15 minutes of screen time to it, to be honest with you. Especially since this movie runs at a bloated 4 hours and you really feel the 4 hours. So yeah, Cyborg mostly handled really well. The extra fluff with him wasn't a fan of. Now Steppenwolf in this movie is handled really, really well. He actually has a character. He actually has some depth. He actually has some personality. Not only that, the whole look of Steppenwolf is actually pretty badass when compared to his Justice League counterpart. Like the whole armor that he wears looks really cool. And Ciarán Hinds' performance is much more subdued and much more monstrous. And he doesn't sound like his normal self through a voice modulator. He actually sounds more weathered, more gruff, more irritated. And I like his whole little subplot of him. He's trying to collect all the mother boxes to appease Darkseid, so that way he can return back to Apocalypse, because he was banished from Apocalypse due to betraying Darkseid. I would have liked to have known what Steppenwolf actually did to betray Darkseid, and why Steppenwolf has been banished from Apocalypse, and why he has to collect these 50,000 worlds. They don't really deep dive too much into what exactly Steppenwolf did. Me personally, when Diana is talking to Bruce about the origins of the mother boxes and Darkseid's first invasion of Earth, I actually would have had the betrayal take place during that flashback, so that way we can get some understanding as to what exactly he did. Speaking of which, the whole story of Wonder Woman, of Diana telling Bruce the origins of how Amazons and Atlantis and humans came together to fight this otherworldly race. I actually like that flashback scene better in the Schneider cut, because it showcases Darkseid, and you can clearly tell that it was supposed to feature Darkseid in his attempt to find the anti-life equation, but failed because the warriors of the Earth united against him. The warriors of the Earth defeated Darkseid and his forces, and this is what causes his retreat and his obsession to find the world that gave him his first big loss. So I like all that stuff. It actually adds to Darkseid, who's not a primary antagonist in this movie. He's more or less the puppet master pulling the strings. But I give Zack Snyder credit for at least introducing the ultimate big bad for this 5-part epic that he had planned. So I'll give you credit for that. And like I said, I did like that little flashback sequence. It was done much, much better with this. We actually get to see Zeus and Ares team up to take on Darkseid. We get a cameo from a Green Lantern, Yulangar, who has a nice little brief fight scene with Darkseid before getting killed by him. So, yeah, I thought the scene was fun. It was fun. I liked it. In terms of like the other subplots that go on with this, we have Lois Lane, who is still struggling with Clark's death. Though in this cut, it's actually handled with more emotion, and she's not so jokey with it. We actually got a cameo by Mark McClure, the original Jimmy Olsen from the Reeves Superman movies, plays a cop who actually befriends Lois. That's a nice little Easter egg and cameo for longtime Superman movie fans. So that was cool to see. We see Martha still struggling with losing Clark. We get the reveal of General Sandwick as Martian Manhunter in a scene that is supposed to be touching, but overall kind of confusing in a way, because Martian shapeshifts as Martha to talk to Lois, and yeah, he kind of knows. I mean, I understand that Martian Manhunter is a mind reader and stuff like that, but the scene comes across as, I don't know, a little weird to me. I mean, I like the reveal, and it ties into Man of Steel and BVS as to to Sandwick's true identity. Though I do not buy the fact that Zack Snyder had that planned. Honestly, truthfully, I think he just took a fan theory and ran with it, and then he just tried to play it off as, yeah, that was the plan all the time. Yeah. Zack Snyder doesn't strike me as somebody who can make a long-term plan and who makes long-term plans when it comes to his movies. That's just how I feel about it, honestly. But I do like the overall look of Martian Manhunter, so that was fine. In terms of the action sequences, they're much better handled in Schneider Cut than they were in Justice League. Steppenwolf's first arrival to Themyscira is actually much more violent and a little bit more aggressive in this version as it was in Schneider Cut. And this is where you get to see Steppenwolf really just have no mercy. I mean, yeah, the dialogue is mostly kept the same, but it's delivered with much more menace in this version. Same thing with the Gotham City Harper fight scene, which is more or less the same thing as it was in Whedon Cut, with the jokes cut out for the most part. That was fine. Same thing with Atlantis and Steppenwolf invading Atlantis to get a mother box from over there. You know, mostly the same with some changes here and there. Like a lot of the fight scenes in this movie are mostly the same, with some changes. Like I said, with some key changes here and there. Does that make it better or worse? Not really. It's still the same. I mean, you still have that stupid opening with Wonder Woman taking down these counter-terrorists, which you could have taken out the entire action sequence and it would have been the same fucking movie. I hate that scene in 2017. I hate that scene in this. It's just filler. That is 10 minutes of absolute filler and nothing happening. Tell you the truth, I would have had the movie kicked off with Steppenwolf invading Themyscira, Hippolyta giving Wonder Woman the signal to about invasion, and then having Diana start her research as to who Darkseid is, instead of her having this really just go nowhere action sequence which did nothing. And this is where the slow motion is used to the excessive amount. Wonder Woman's opening fight scene is done in slow motion. There's this obnoxious choir that plays in the background of whenever time she's on screen, like, which is irritating. When Bruce sees Aquaman, you literally have a minute to 2 minutes of these people singing a folk song, which adds absolutely nothing to the movie. Not only that, the overuse of popular music in this is so jarring because half these songs don't even match the scenes that they're in, and they're so out of place. It's like, yeah, even though Schneider Cut has done in the first half of Schneider Cut is decent for the most part, you still have a lot of things that Schneider just overindulges in, and he just can't get out of his own way. And I'm sorry, I know a lot of people like this. I know a lot of people like that. I've grown tired of that when it comes to Zack Snyder movies because he doesn't do anything to elevate his style of filmmaking. It's always the same. So yeah, pretty much after the League has their first fight with Steppenwolf, that's where they get the idea that it's time to resurrect Superman, because the only way to fight this evil is to have someone of equal footing on their side. And that's where they come up with this plan to try and resurrect Superman. And the plan is to use the mother boxes. And that's pretty much where part one stops, and part two will pick up. And part two picks up. So, in terms of looking at Schneider Cut so far from the first half perspective, it's an improvement over the 2017 movie, but it does have a lot of issues like I illustrated. The overuse of popular music is ridiculous. The overuse of slow motion so far is graining. The action sequences, they're mostly kept the same with changes here and there. The movie is unnecessarily stretched out with a lot of filler scenes that you really didn't need. Keeping in Cyborg's origin, yes. Having him explore his powers, good idea. But I would have preferred he would do that when he's with the Justice League and not by himself, because those scenes just drag on way too long. And like I said, the pacing could be very, very sluggish in this first half as well. It's not tight. It's really drags and it's really, really slow. I mean, I do like how the scene with Jim Gordon is kept mostly the same with when him beating the Justice League, and that was my favorite scene in the 2017 movie. That's my favorite scene in this movie, and he and Flash have a nice little exchange afterwards. So I like that. Uh, but yeah, all in all, the first half of Justice League is solid. It's not perfect. It's got some problems, me personally, but it's in a vast improvement. And like I said, it sets the tone and stays consistent with one cadence forward, and that's the most important. So, yep, those are my thoughts on the first half of Snyder Cut. Okay, so the second half of Zack Snyder's Justice League is the focus on Superman's resurrection. So basically, picks up with Cyborg and Flash grave digging Superman out of his grave digging Superman, and having this idea of using the mother boxes to resurrect him. So yeah, just like in the 2017 version, they're using the concept of the mother box to resurrect Superman, knowing that it can go either way. I mentioned in my 2017 review of Justice League, I would have just did it similar to how it was done in the comics, with the Eradicator having a role in this. And I've also mentioned that it doesn't matter if it breaks canon, because Zack Snyder is already breaking established lore and canon with these movies anyway, so does it really matter? Absolutely not. I think using the mother box to resurrect Superman is a very convoluted idea, and it's a very 50-50 chance of what's going to actually happen. Like I said, I would have just did it with I would have did similar to how it was done in the comics with his resurrection, as opposed to the whole convoluted idea of the mother box. It was stupid in the 2017 movie, and it's not so much better in this either. Superman's resurrection and the fight scene he has with the Justice League is pretty much played the same way it was in the 2017 version, only in this version, it's not as comical. It's not as unnecessarily funny. It's actually done in a much more serious way and taken more seriously, so I can appreciate that. Once again, Lois is the reason why he stops fighting, and this is what causes them to fly back to the farmhouse. And Lois says a line that I think is like a dig at how Zack Snyder portrayed his version of Superman. So basically, the first Superman says something to Lois, and Lois says, "You spoke," and then Clark responds with, "Did I not before?" If you watch Man of Steel and BVS, Clark, you are not the great oratory. You say things. Your responses are so few and far between. Half the time you're just looking at people. You don't say anything. Like, you really don't say a goddamn word. And no one gets into your head. So yes, you did not speak before now. I think that was Zack Snyder. I think that was just Zack Snyder poking fun at the fact that his version of Superman has a lack of talking skills and barely says a word. And when he does say something, it doesn't really mean anything, because he doesn't have any response to it. But I digress. All this pretty much leads to is, a nice reunion with Lois and Martha and Clark going to the Kryptonian ship and going to the Fortress of Solitude in a way. And this scene is played up as his resurrection. So if you look at Superman's character arc in Zack Snyder's universe, Man of Steel was his birth, BVS was his death, and Justice League is his resurrection. So it's pretty much the three phases of Christ, which continues with that allegory of Superman being Jesus. Now, I never really cared for that portrayal of Superman. I prefer the Superman who is a son of two worlds, and who loves humanity and loves the earth and loves people in the earth. I do not care for him being a Christ allegory and shit like that. That never interested me. It never will interest me. We already know he has godlike power. That's not what makes Superman interesting. What makes Superman interesting is that he has godlike power, but he acts like a human. He acts like he's one of us. That's what always made Superman more interesting to me. Him being above us is not interesting. And this further illustrates just how lack of an understanding Zack Snyder truly does have for the character of Superman. And it's frustrating that you gave this man Superman, because he doesn't understand it. He's more focused on the godlike stature of Superman than he is on the more human level of Superman, which is why Zack Snyder's version of Superman is treated more like a god and less like a human, which is, I don't care for that. I never cared for that version of Superman, and I never will. I always found that version to be absolutely just unappealing and just boring. But yeah, this scene ties back to BVS and Man of Steel, in which Clark, embraces humanity for the first time, I guess, and he dons the black suit. Okay, whatever, that's cool. The black suit looks nice. It's nice little callback to the Death of Superman comic strip. So that's okay. That's cool. That's nice little fan service, I guess. But it all leads to the big final battle, which is played out very, very differently in this version as opposed to the Whedon cut. Now, in this version, you have way too many things happening. A lot of things are happening, but basically, the whole point is to split the mother boxes in half, so that way the League can stop Darkseid's impending arrival on Earth, and to stop Steppenwolf, in which they eventually do. Now, the final battle in this movie is much more violent. It's much more graphic in a lot of ways. The Flash plays a big part in the end, in which he uses super speed and breaks his rule to split up the mother boxes, and pretty much helps Superman and Cyborg do that. But leading up to that, there's just a lot going on. You got Steppenwolf messing around with Wonder Woman and Aquaman. You have the Flash who gets you have Cyborg who has a vision within inside the mother boxes, in which he sees himself and his mother and his father. Prior to that, before the resurrection of Superman, we have a nightmare sequence of Darkseid inventing Earth and using anti-life to possess Superman. So the whole third act has got way too many things happening. I told that out of sequence, by the way, but whatever. I'm just trying to breeze right along through. You get all this convoluted nonsense happening, but eventually, Flash uses his super speed to unite the mother boxes and stops Darkseid's impending arrival on Earth, in which that portal closes. And in that case, Wonder Woman chops off Steppenwolf's head, killing him. And of course, you get the tease of Darkseid talking to Desaad, and of Darkseid and Desaad having a little conversation, in which Desaad said, "I told you your uncle would fail," with Darkseid saying, "You're right, bro. He did fail. But ready to the old ways, we're gonna still do our thing because anti-life is found and I need it." That's basically the general gist of Darkseid's conversation with Desaad, setting up what was to come with Justice Leagues 2 and 3. The heroes save the day, and then we get to the epilogues, and there are so many epilogues. Epilogue number 1, to me, is the best out of all of them. It pretty much brings closure to Silas and Victor's story, in which Silas pretty much tells Victor that despite everything, he wishes he could have had time for his son, but was always proud of his son no matter what he did, which I liked. That was really well handled. And not only that, I think Cyborg's entire character arc in this movie is really well handled. Having him trying to struggle with being this new version of himself and then coming to peace with it at the end. I like it. It's a nice, strong character arc, and it works really, really well. Barry's subplot with his dad and trying to get into the crime lab of Central City, that's also paid off nicely. And I like the scenes of Billy Crudup and Ezra Miller. I mean, they teased it in the Whedon cut, but didn't really do much with it. In the Schneider cut, you actually get 2 scenes, and I like Billy Crudup. I like the whole story, and it actually sets up what would have been the Flash solo movie of him, basically the Flash solo movie. But I like it. I thought Billy Crudup as Henry Allen was actually really good, and the chemistry he had with Miller is actually fairly decent. Even though I think personally Miller is an asshole of a human being, he's not a horrible actor. To be honest with you, I mean, I would prefer someone else playing the Flash, but what are you gonna do? But I like that scene. You have Diana looking all heroic. You have, and then we cut to the, second epilogue scene, which is basically the post-credit scene of the Whedon cut, now being placed over here and more expanded on, which is basically Lex Luthor and Deathstroke having a meeting. In this version, in the theatrical version, it's all about Luthor wanting to create the Injustice League, but in this But this intended version is basically set up for what would have been the Ben Affleck Batman solo movie, in which Luthor gives Deathstroke Bruce's identity. And I like how the scene is played out in this version as opposed to the 2017 version. I still don't like Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. I think he sucks. But Joe Magliano's Deathstroke will forever be something that could have been, because I think he would have been awesome as Deathstroke. He had the look, the costume looked great, he had the personality for the few words that he said. And now we get to the final epilogue, which is a nightmare scene. Listen, even though the nightmare scenes aesthetically look cool, I just don't like them. Just in the main narrative of these movies, the nightmare scene in BVS was more about setting up than it was about telling the story of what was supposed to be happening, which is why BVS was a failure of a movie, because that movie was all set up and not focused. In this, again, it's more setup, though I can be more lenient to how it's portrayed in this movie because the major threat has now been settled, but you also have the dark side tease. So the nightmare sequence works better here in context. I still think you didn't really need it, but it is what it is. So basically in this nightmare scene, Bruce has his own little band of bandits. That includes Cyborg, Flash, Mera, Deathstroke, and, surprise, surprise, the return of Jared Leto's Joker. Now, in Suicide Squad, I thought Leto's Joker was terrible. In this version, it's not that bad. It's still not fantastic. His Joker is still, I'm still not over the moon with his Joker, but, you know, seeing Leto Joker bounce off dialogue with Ben Affleck's Batman and then making references to Robin and Bruce's failures and the threat of Bruce wanting to kill Joker, I like that stuff, actually. I thought that was actually nice. You know, we got a chance to see these versions of Batman and Joker interact with one another. So I can't really have too much complaints. And then the movie officially ends with Martian Manhunter having a conversation with Batman. With Bruce, I should say. Now, originally it was supposed to be the Green Lanterns, Kilowog and Jon Stewart talking to Bruce, but they switched it over to Martian Manhunter because it was established earlier that Senwick was Manhunter. Here's the deal. Martian, where the fuck were you during the final battle? What were you doing? Just like, you know, having a cup of tea? You were on Mars? What the hell, dude? Like an entire city was leveled and you're just chilling. You could have been in the fight helping out instead of saying, I have a stake to this world. We could have used your help earlier, dude. Which I think would have made the scene more interesting. But whatever. You know, Martian and Bruce have a little bit of a conversation where Martian says the war is coming and welcome to the team, basically. So yeah, that's basically how the movie ends. So to give some little tidbits, there are a few things there are a few things I want to just cover before I give my overall final grade on Snyder Cut. Number one, Desaad, who is mocapped and voiced by Peter Guinness. I actually really like him as Desaad. I like the conversations that he has with Steppenwolf. Desaad is basically Steppenwolf's form of communication with Apocalypse is Desaad. I like the whole thing of the anti-life equation, which is basically in which can pretty much renders all life meaningless and puts you at the mercy of whoever has you. Okay, that's cool. The whole concept of the mother boxes is to form this unity which terraforms whatever planet it's on into Apocalypse, which is okay, nice. I didn't really explain that earlier. And you have a couple like other little things. Like I said, I already mentioned the whole subplot of Barry and his dad. I like that a lot, though it was well handled. Cyborg has a very strong character arc. Joe Morton's performance all throughout Justice League, I think, is really, really good and gives a lot of merit and grit to his character. You have the character of Ryan Choi is also introduced. He works closely with Silas Stone. Ryan Choi eventually turns into the Atom, who is pretty much DC's equivalent of Ant-Man. So Schneider was setting up some elements that were to be further expanded upon in other movies. Again, he's more worried about setting up than telling a story. And that will always be his downfall when it comes to his version of the DCEU. It's all set up with the majority of the focus is more on setup than it is on actually explaining a self-contained story. And that will always be my problem with Zack Snyder and his idea for his DC universe. He was more worried about just cramming everything to as little movies as possible instead of fleshing everything out. That's why Snyder Cut would not have worked as a 4-hour movie if it would have gotten released in 2017. It would have bombed badly. A $300 million movie, you're trying to sell a 4-hour movie to a general audience? No, thank you. The most people can stay in the theater is maybe 3 hours. This version of Justice League would have probably failed harder than the Whedon cut, and I say that wholeheartedly. If you cut an hour out of this movie, trim a lot of the fat, yeah, maybe it could have worked. But if you released it as it was, definitely not. So with all that being said, my final thoughts on Snyder Cut is a 6 out of 10. I like it on the same level of Man of Steel. It's good, and it plays as a decent third chapter to the overall narrative, but it does have a lot of issues. It's not this perfect movie, but it does tell a more complete story when you watch it back to back with Man of Steel and BVS. And that's the best that I can say. So with all that being said, 6 out of 10 for Zack Snyder's Justice League. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like this video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.